art form that gets their own venue. Artists, we got the sketch art, we got the costumes, we got amateur films, nothing for writers. I thought, well, let's get something started for writers. And originally, Skip and I were the original two, plus Sam Messerly, who was a comic artist. And we weren't too sure how to do this other than let's just see what the folks want to come here. I know one thing I want to do for the folks is basically give you guys a chance to ask, experienced writers, questions you may have to help out with what you want to do with your writing. So, like Skip here, he's got, I don't know if I want to steal your introduction.
Well, why don't you introduce yourself and what you do, and we'll go down the line.
Sure, all right.
That's probably a good way to start if you're not familiar with us, maybe. So
yeah.
You do that.
Okay, so anyway, I'm Neil Riebe. I've been writing since 1988, and I've been flirting with the idea of writing ever since I found out that the movie War of the Worlds was an actual novel. It's like, oh, this stuff actually comes from books. Holy crap! And I thought, well, cool, because I never pictured myself ever becoming a filmmaker, but I figured, well, maybe I can write this sort of thing. So, started writing in 1988, wrote a few short stories. They weren't very good. And then I got my first copy of G-Fan, which had the three-part story Godzilla versus Atragon, and I already had a Godzilla story in the back of my mind, and so that's then how I got the start from my kaiju fiction. Thought, well, if they're publishing this stuff, I'll go and write my story down. In which case, it did get published. JD really liked it a lot, so I sent him 2 more stories. Kind of long story short, so I'll give you guys some time. My friend John here was kind of pressuring me to get on KDP to go and publish my own original kaiju fiction. And so which I finally did do that this year. Got my first novel here published, which you can find over on Amazon. Thank you. And so anyway, so I've been writing since 1988. So I've published nonfiction articles, short stories, and plus I got the novel. So I have some experience in these areas. If you got any questions, I can cover questions in those areas. So that I'm going to pass on now to John.
Okay, well, so I'm John LeMay, and I actually grew up reading Neil's fan fiction in G-Fan when I was a kid, and I also read Skip's fan fiction in G-Fan. But I'm kind of the odd man out at this panel because all these guys have done fiction, and I haven't done a single fiction book yet. So, I guess if you have questions about the legalities of writing a non-fiction book that involve Japanese monster properties or things like that, if questions about images, or just questions about how to get your book on Amazon's platform in general, those would be the questions for me. And then for them, they can tell you about story structure and how to write, fictional novels and whatnot. And then I'll pass it off to Nate.
Yeah, I'm Nathan Marchand. I'm a professional writer. I actually studied professional writing when I was in undergrad, and I am currently in grad school over in Fort Wayne, Indiana. I'm studying English with a concentration in writing. I'm also an English teacher there, graduate teaching assistant to help pay the tuition. I'm a freelancer. I've done a lot of things. I've submitted a few articles to G-Fan to get published. I have about, I think, 7 or 8 titles to my name. This is a couple of them I brought with me. I've got a kaiju novella, and then this is a short story collection that the final story in this, which is also the longest one, is also a kaiju story. And I've been a fan of giant monsters for about 2 decades now, so it was bound to happen that eventually I'd start writing this stuff myself. Got ideas for some other stories.
Well, I'm Skip Peel, and if you've been reading G-Fan for a long time, you probably know my work. I had the good fortune of, I'm old enough to actually have kind of been on almost the ground floor of the magazine, and I came up with the Rex Summerall series. I kind of saw this opportunity of little kind of almost vignettes that people would write in. I want to see this monster versus that monster. I was trained in English, and I'm a big fan of classic literature. So I kind of took ideas that I had and made that whole series and did a lot of kind of literary tricks with it. And it's been going on for a long time. I don't think I've had a story published. Life is busy in G-Fan for about 3 years, but I'll get back to it eventually. But I really got a chance to hone my craft with a readership through Rex Summerall. Now, back in the 90s, I wrote quite a bit, and this is where sometimes G-Fans give back to G-Fans. It was, I think, 2 years ago now that I met John in person for the first time, and I had not been nosing around and trying to get anything published for a while. I'd had a kaiju story published in one of the Daikaiju anthologies, the first one with the editor Robert Hood. But I learned how John was doing it with this whole self-publishing thing that's so easy now. Very easy. It used to be a vanity thing. Now you can do it at virtually no cost. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do that. And I went back and dusted off one of my old books, which is a backwards twist on Dickens. It's a Halloween version of a Christmas Carol where everything's flipped. It's a Halloween hymn, and evil spirits are trying to turn a bad man or a good man bad. Basically, is what the whole thing is. And one of the tricks of it is, I mean, I love Dickens. He's one of my favorites. It follows the book almost precisely. So if you have a scene in the original and even beats of dialogue, the beats of dialogue are very, so it's really an adaptation. And I finally got it out, but I haven't gotten to promote it yet. That's maybe one of the things we'll talk about. But it's a seasonal book, clearly, so we're getting around to the time of year where it's time to start promoting this thing. So we'll see how my instincts work with that. But anyway.
I want to read this.
Okay.
Really badly right now.
So that's us.
Okay, I just have one more quick question to the audience. I was actually talking with the editor and founder of Wild Hunt Press, and he said he might be here. I was wondering, is he here? And if he is, do you want to raise your hand?
I don't think he's here.
He's not here. Okay, shoot. I was hoping he'd be here, but kind of an extra special guest. So you can actually now talk to an actual
Yeah, 'cause
publisher.
I wanted to talk with him actually because he's putting out that anthology, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay, so there's the introductions. So at this point, first come, first serve. If you got any questions about writing, any aspect of writing, just go ahead and shoot your hand up and we'll go ahead and answer it.
How do you develop writing habits? I know I have a lot of ideas, and sometimes it can be hard to get everything down on paper, and let's see, what's the other part of that question? Just how do you
Make the time?
make the time? Yeah,
I was going to say, what kind of habits are you talking about here? That would be my first question. Are you talking about blocking out time to write or things within the process? when
Probably
you're actually
blocking out time.
Yeah. For me, I think it just boils down to figuring out when would be the best time for you to do it. If you know at what point in the day you're going to have a lot of energy, whether that's really early in the morning before you go to work, or if it's after you've finished work, or something like that. And set aside that time and try to keep it as best you can.
And dealing with procrastination.
Oh, well, it's almost the same thing what he just mentioned. Well, usually what I do when I get caught in these situations, either lack of time, and sometimes the longer the span spreads between the last time you wrote, right, the harder it is to get yourself more motivated. And usually what I do with myself is that, okay, since I already know that I know I should, but I don't feel like it, and it's starting to become like a job, I say, all right, try to do at least one sentence, or at least maybe one paragraph. That's it. That's all we're going to ask of you today. Just do the one sentence, get it done, or else one paragraph, whatever. Something real small, and do baby steps. And each day, go back and do one paragraph, one paragraph, one paragraph. And eventually, you find yourself like, okay, I got my paragraph, but I got my creative juices still going. You find yourself doing 3 paragraphs, and eventually, you have to get your brain reorientated to do that sort of thing. So I said, start baby steps and go ahead and give yourself, okay, I'm just going to do a paragraph today.
Yeah, and don't feel like you have to hit a certain word count if you know it's going to be too much for you. I know, like, some writers like throwing around magic numbers, like, oh, I always write 1,000 words a day, or 500, 2,000. I met a guy who's writing full time. It's Jonathan Mayberry. I met Jonathan Mayberry, and I asked him some questions about writing. He says he writes like 8 or 9 hours a day.
That's full time.
And gets like, it's like pumping out like 10,000 words a day or something. It's absolutely insane, the amount. The man's a machine.
Yeah. 2 things.
But don't feel like you have to do that.
Yeah.
Work your way up. It's like exercising. Don't go to a 200 pounds on a weight machine if you can only do 100.
2 things I'd say, and I don't know if you have writer's block at all, but one of the things I've always remembered that I had an English teacher tell me, and this was just about any kind of writing, she would say, just write.
Yeah.
If you're sitting down and you've got nothing or you're too busy, if you just throw what comes in your mind, because something will. Put that down. Regarding procrastination, maybe it would be helpful. This is what I do for myself. I'm not naturally a procrastinator, but I set myself like very specific goals about certain things. Like I wanted to get like a rough version of this up by Halloween last year, and that was my goal. I did, and then I kind of took a break. I wanted to get my promo materials before G-Fest done, for example, and that was like my little like set self-rule. So that may help you if you take those seriously. Now, if you're somebody who says, to heck with it, then maybe it won't work. But if you can set those self-goals,
I'd like to.
Well, start tonight. If you got your computer on hand, one paragraph, one sentence.
World's a movement,
You, I think you were next.
My question is, where do you guys go for inspiration? Like, say, like you have writer's block, or you're having trouble getting something, or you just want to get some creative fuel in your body. Where are the places you go, or things you do to garnish inspiration?
I call my brilliant writer friend Nick Hayden, who's contributed a short story that's at the end of this. He is the best writer that I know. He's criminally unknown. He is incredibly talented, and I will just call him up and I will just run through the creative process with him and bounce ideas off of him. And sometimes he won't even say anything. I'll just be talking to him on the phone or something, and I'll figure it all out myself. So I would highly recommend, if you can, if it's not a specific group, maybe you can find a writers group, hang out with them, and just talk shop and throw ideas around. And all of those creative juices together, you're bound to come up with something better. Because I think creativity really does flourish in community, which is why stuff like G-Fest is wonderful.
Me, maybe a little bit different, although I agree with the community thing. That really does help. I was an only child, so this is maybe why, and I grew up on a farm till I was 10, so maybe this is why. But I get about that, it's the films that I love, and you're playing in that environment. And a lot of times that's almost like feeding yourself or a recharge of batteries for me. To go back and say, okay, I want to write something like this, let's go back to this thing that gives me these feelings and ideas. And kind of, it's like I said, it's like a recharge, so to speak.
I mirror Skip because I was going to say I read what I want to write. Like I read the type of book that I want to emulate, and I let the way they write kind of soak in. I let just the look of the book kind of inspire me, and so that's how I do it.
And I think you can start through is like, if you're interested in writing, ask yourself, well, what sort of themes that interest you? Like, I one time Matt Denny, and I'm familiar with him, he wrote the Atomic Rex novels, and so he wanted to do an anthology called Attack of the Kaiju. So he came to the G-Fest as Neil, would you be interested in writing a story for me? And I really had no idea what to do, but I said, yeah, sure, just because, well, as an opportunity to get a story published. And so I thought, well, okay, what kind of themes really interest me? And one theme that interests me with giant monsters is that you get a lot of these movies that show the monsters being controlled by aliens or humans. I always kind of wonder, well, what's that like from the perspective of the monsters? Are they aware of what's going on in their heads and they're being controlled? So I wrote a short story where this is entirely from the monster's perspective, where he's being controlled by aliens to go and destroy cities. And so I was thinking, okay, well, how does this work? How would you convince this animal to do these things? I figured, well, one thing you do is you can manipulate them through like, hormonal urges, like through emotions, or else keep the thoughts in their heads so simple that they think it's their own. So they think of their own, making their own decisions, and that's why they do what they do.
So, I'm sorry.
You're good.
All right. So, do you think it's kind of like the way Loki did to Hawkeye, or something like that, or?
I'm not familiar with those characters.
Marvel.
First Avengers.
Oh, okay. But otherwise, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Okay, I was going to say there was the next person who had their hand up was way in back there. If we can call on him.
I really want to write a web comic using several kaiju and some of my own. How would I be able to do that?
Legally, I think the answer is you can't. I believe the question was he wants to do a webcomic with Toho and his own monsters. If you're doing it just as fan fiction,
Yes, that's fine.
That'd be fine, but don't expect to try to publish it or monetize it in any kind of way. I don't don't know if anybody can speak more to that or not.
Well, you probably already realize you can't monetize it.
Yep.
But I like Sam Metzgerly, who was one of our first guests, and he was a comic artist, and he posted his comics on DeviantArt.com. And so if you're familiar with DeviantArt.com, if you create your own, fan fiction comic, you can put it there for people to see. And you'll probably get plenty of readers. Sam did, That's one place you can look.
Or for some people to steal your work by changing it up a bit.
Well,
It's the risk that you run.
anytime you get something out there, you run that risk. I think I saw some hands out here. Okay.
So how exactly does the plotting process work? How detailed are you with plotting when it comes to making stories?
My first question to you would be, do you consider yourself an outliner or what we in the writing industry call a pantser?
I have merged more with outlining a whole lot more.
Okay, because for those who don't know, there's generally two approaches to it. There's outliners who usually put out some sort of an outline so they know what they're doing before they even pen the first word. And then there are what what we call pantsers because they fly by the seat of their pants. This is how Stephen King works, actually. So when he starts writing a book, he has no idea what's going to happen. He just starts writing and figures it all out as he goes, which both a strength and a weakness on his part.
Oh, yeah.
Because his twists can be great or they're silly. But so you kind of have to figure out how you want to do that. If you prefer to outline, which is good anyway, even if you're a pantser, you'll have to make an outline for a publisher anyway, because they want to know how the book is going to progress that you've already written, so they can get a general idea of what's going on. So in some ways, you'll be doing yourself a favor lately. But the thing of it is that it just depends on if you want to front load or back load your work, I would say, because if you just want to do all the writing and not outline, then you're going to be front loading the work. Whereas if you're outlining first, then you're back loading it. So, but an outline can be very beneficial, so you can kind of figure out some of the kinks in a plot before you actually get started. And but then what I like to do is I'm a little bit of both. I like having a general idea of, particularly for a longer work like a book, I like having a general idea of what I'm doing, but I leave myself enough breathing room so if I come up with something on the fly that is better, I can still work it in there. It's kind of like, if you're planning a trip, you either can take the direct route, so you're like, I'm going from point A to point B and I'm going to take the fastest route, or you can be like, actually I want to take a detour and take the scenic route, or something like that. Leave yourself room to do that.
Thank you.
I think I saw your hand first.
Yeah. A common problem of mine is having the beginning and end of the story in mind, but the middle section is always more difficult. How would you guys approach that kind of problem?
Well, you have to connect the dots for one. If you've got, I find it interesting you have a beginning and a middle, because a beginning and an end. With most of my writing, I probably have the end in mind more first, and then work backwards from that. Or sometimes I have a key moment somewhere in the plot that's like kind of my inspirational moment, and then I work around that. But I'd say connect your dots, but I would also say if you're writing things with strong characters, know your characters, and your characters, if you really know them, probably will write themselves a little bit, because you're like, okay, well, this character is going to do this, and if you know you need to all get them in this one room at this one time where some murder happens or whatever in your story, then you have the journey by what they're all going to do if you also know your beginning. So at least you've got those two parts, and you just gotta like figure out the journey there.
Yeah, I can vouch for
that. Your style too.
I can vouch for that advice because that's exactly what I did. I was an exact situation you're in where I had a novel idea. The ending was all panned out. I had the beginning, and now I got the characters in the middle. Like, oh shoot, what do I do? But since I have my characters already fleshed out, I asked myself, okay, what do my characters do? And so then I can make a lot of notes until I finally, jot down all my ideas and then hone it down so that it's a nice, clear narrative right to the end. I mean, it is something you have to kind of search your way in the dark.
You have a hand up for a question?
I just wanted to say as a fellow writer and one who published a book, there's always things you gotta change at the last minute, things you gotta add because things are just not working, and it's frustrating. How do you handle that stress?
For making changes?
Yeah, when you don't want to change, when your editor tells you to change it and you have to change it,
One thing I'd say, if you let's say it is a situation where you have an editor and you have to change it. I know, maybe it's your baby and you're like, no, but I guess you try, if you're going to be an optimist, look at it as a exercise in creativity. It's like, what can I do? It's like, take a filmmaking example, the original Star Wars, A New Hope. How many limitations did George Lucas have because of the technology, budget, and what the studio was doing, and how good of a film did he make because of those limitations? So maybe if you absolutely had to do it, better than not having your book published, do what the editor's saying and try to look at it in a creative way. How can I most creatively adapt what I prefer? If I'm understanding your question right, it sounds like it'd be something you don't want to change. Now, if it's a technical error or something, then I don't know, you just swallow that and go on.
Well, I figure it's nice to talk about something that a lot of new writers and writers who've experienced this before understand this concept, you know?
I actually had this happen to me with my first novel. I went through the whole process of getting it published. It took longer than I would have wanted to do, but I was really excited when the publisher finally accepted it. But he said that the ending was too clean. It was too, there was too much resolution, and he wanted it to be a little bit different. The way he explains that, leave it open so that there could be more books. And at first I was a little bit opposed to it, but then, as I name dropped Nick Hayden earlier, I met with him for coffee, and I said, I need to figure out how to make this work with the publisher. And we came up with a way to make it work, and I think it's a better book because of it. Because now I am working on that sequel.
That's just like the time when I only had 8 chapters in that book, and I added 4 more because they told me to add more.
Yeah, don't just discount what a publisher tells you, just because you're the artiste, you're the auteur, and it's gonna be your vision or whatever. Because sometimes you'll be surprised what they tell you may actually improve it.
Okay, before we take you, we're going to have you next, but I think, didn't you have your hand up earlier? Okay, so we'll go with you, and then we'll take you next. So go ahead.
So when you have, how do you find a publisher or like a company that could get your work out there, how can you get one that you know to trust?
Well, that's a good question. Because I'm probably not the best one to answer that, because actually I don't deal with publishers anymore. That's why I go through KDP, so I don't have to deal with that problem. But I don't know, what genre are you working in anyway?
I'm working in a little bit of mystery, but also like giant monsters, like horror.
Because if you want to do giant kaiju, I mean, there isn't too many publishers for that. There's only two that I know of, like Wild Hunt Press. Now, since I know those guys, I can vouch for them. And then Severed Press, they publish a lot of that material, and I know some of the authors were actually, maybe, I don't know if you, would you, George, want to comment on Severed Press at all? Do you find that they've been easy people to work with?
So far they have been.
Okay.
I mean, they, like you said, they're one of the few companies that is actively looking for giant monster-related things. And so far, like, I'd sent my story to 1 or 2 publishers beforehand and had to wait months and months, almost up to a year, just for them to say no thanks. Severed Press got back to me within a much more reasonable amount of time. The maximum is 2 months. I like telling this story to people because it shows how nerve-wracking it can be. It was almost up to the end of that 2-month period and I hadn't heard anything. And I just resigned myself to thinking this is another rejection. And right on the day before, I heard back the answer of yes. And as far as working with them, they didn't ask for a whole lot of alterations to the story. Just a few typos they'd seen here and there. They've been consistent with paying me. They've been good with promoting it. So, yeah, I would say Severed Press is good.
I would say if just some general advice for a search, look at the publishers whose books that you're reading, and then see if you can glean some information from people who've written for them or are writing for them, and see how they feel about it. And look at their websites, look at their writers' guidelines, see what they require. Some publishers will take unsolicited manuscripts. Some will take unagented. Some won't take unagented publishers. So there's a lot of things that where you are as a writer you have to take into consideration as you're looking for that. One bit of advice I heard is that they said start with the big publishers and work your way down to the smaller ones. When I was your age and I was studying writing, I was told you want to start with the smaller ones because they're more likely to accept you if you're a newcomer. Because that's the problem if you're trying to break into the bigger publishing houses. They're looking for writers that are marketable, and if you're not a known name, if you're not a Stephen King or a Dean Koontz or whoever, they're not as likely to pay any attention to you because you're not an established name.
So start small, work up?
I don't know. I would say, start big and just work your way down. I mean, you never know. You might get lucky. Just throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks.
Take a shotgun approach.
Yeah, the only thing that's you deal with the bigger publishers is also you deal with a long wait. You can say you might be waiting, a year per publisher, and then each time is a rejection. So 4 or 5 years can go by before get through there.
I've heard some people say that you can do the simultaneous submission thing, and if you kind of mention you're not the only publisher I've submitted to, it might light a fire under them a little bit to figure it out.
I have my doubts about that. If they usually, my impression from people that I read online from editors and publishers, if you're doing simultaneous submissions, they don't want anything to do with you. That's at least the takeaway that I've had with
that. But that's why looking at a publisher's writer's guidelines is paramount. You need to look at those first, because if you don't follow them, they won't even look at your manuscript.
Okay, so you had your next. You're next.
Yes, I would say one thing I was going to ask, but I could say first, I've had 2 novels published by Severed Press. I do like them basically. They're I do think they're more or less quicker in getting back to you, like you said, and they more or less let you do what you want. The only thing they're really strict as that I've found personally is that when it comes to doing a sequel, your first book has to do really good for them to do that. Otherwise, they will direct you, come up with a different concept for the next one. And I suppose I could understand. I should say, though, I am the founder of Wild Hunt Press.
That was the guy we were waiting for.
Right for the show. Took a seated bow, and since we're new, we just debuted on last Halloween. And the first attack of the kaiju that Neil mentioned was independently published by Matt Denyon. We're going to do volume 2, and we can look at some of your things, some of your work. We do like to, in terms of quickness, speed, I guess we try to get back fast. Sometimes that could be difficult because we get a lot. And the staff I have, because we're so new, a lot of them are doing work for just a small percentage right now. And something always happens to someone's computer, and before you know it, there's only 2 people doing all the editing for a 3-month interval. But we do try to get back quick. We do try to have open guidelines. We don't tell people, we don't have some of the strict, I should say, I'll use this phrase. We're not politically correct. We don't insist on that. As long as your story, is, when I say a good one, what you're talking about has a point to the story, and it's not just gratuitous. I don't mind for controversial material. The only thing I really draw the line in is like hatred towards any specific group of people. Like real people. If you want to invent a species, like alien races, and you want to do that, that's fine. But so we're hopefully up and coming. Got 6 books out so far, with the next batch ready to go, and we will be doing kaiju.
Right.
And I guess related to this sort of, that I did want to ask the guys there, and this is sort of different from what you were talking about before, but I really like to hear their insight, is how do you deal when you inevitably get negative reviews on Amazon, etc.?
My first negative review, one of my friends wrote a worse review that sounded really bad, and that was their response to help me out.
Well, do I know? They wrote like a rebuttal to the bad review?
They wrote a poor, they said that I had really poor grammar, so they wrote a review with extremely poor grammar that said that John LeMay was a legend, and they misspelled legend.
So they were doing a parody of his review.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yeah, for me, I've not really had that experience because I've not gotten it out there professionally, and I don't think I've had anyone zero in on me negatively. And writing for GFan in the fan fiction days, it wasn't like that ever got back to me really. So I don't know. I think you will probably have to swallow it and go on. Not take it too seriously. That person doesn't know you. Not everybody likes everything. I've heard enough criticisms of things that I think is so fabulous that I realize everybody has their opinion.
Yeah, you learn to grow a thick skin when it comes to these things. Although I have heard some people say, well, if you're looking at, say, Amazon reviews, look at the 5-star reviews and look at the 1-star reviews and see how people are reacting and kind of give you an idea how to respond.
And one thing to try to do is use it, as a positive. It's like, okay, you got your negative review or negative feedback, and you kind of like try to listen as much as you can between the lines and see what it is that they're, feeling negative toward, and then you can kind of look at it, think, well, okay, is that an area where I can improve my writing for the next time? This is kind of sounding egotistical, but it's a long time since I took any negative feedback. But so I'm trying to think way back when I was getting negative feedback, how did I handle it? Because today, if someone gave me negative feedback, I think I'd probably just blow it off, say, okay, whatever. But I would probably just listen very closely and see if there's anything that I could use to improve my own craft. If they found like the pacing's too slow or the resolution is just too contrived, or the case, or needs more development. So just kind of listen to that kind of thing. And yeah, you're just I can't remember. Would you guys something where you just have to develop a thick skin? I mean, criticism is just a fact of life.
I would say, take it into consideration, but don't feel like you have to be slave to it.
Yeah, don't overthink it is what I was going to say.
And the thing you especially want to watch out for, because this is just human psychology, for every negative comment, so we'll say for every negative review that you see of your work, it's probably going to take, I think, 3 to 5 to make up for it.
Yeah.
So that's why, even if you have a book on Amazon and you get 100 reviews, and 90% of them are positive, all you're going to be thinking about are the 10% that hate you. So that's something to take into consideration. So like I said, don't feel like you have to be slave to the 10% that don't like it.
Yeah, and Chris, also not everyone's going to like your style. I mean, you think of like every great movie out there that's popular in science fiction, like Star Wars. I mean, there's people who hate the original Star Wars, and there's people who hate The Empire Strikes Back, and it's like, well, no matter how good you are, there's always going to be someone that you're just not going to click with. It's almost kind of like dating. I mean, not everyone you ask out is going to click with you. So it's almost the same thing. There is almost like a relationship there, involved between the author and
the creator and the audience.
And the audience.
What would be hard, Neil, as I was going to say, is like when I do agree, you try to see what the criticisms were, and maybe you can improve on that. But it's hard when you get, I guess, for lack of a better description, a trollish, criticism, like I got for one of my novels that just said, was bad from beginning to end, don't waste your money. I can't work with that.
Yeah, if the review just says, it sucks.
Yeah.
That gives me nothing.
The review sucks.
Yeah, that's right. I'll go in there and it's like, your review sucks. I am reviewing your review.
So I kind of lost track who might be the first one to get their hands up. Do you guys maybe?
I have not paying attention.
Or should we
I've seen about 3 hands go up.
Okay, I don't think we haven't called on you yet. So.
No, I was.
Oh, there's the one right behind you.
Yeah, it's right behind.
And I think I struggle with in my writing is that I get a lot of ideas in one moment, and I want to put like a lot of things in there. And sometimes I'm good at sifting some of the ones out, but other times I'm really bad at letting go of those ideas. And so I'm just wondering, like, what are your advice for just shifting through those ideas to find what should be in there and what shouldn't?
Well,
just have a choice, more or less.
Yeah, first of all, just save all your ideas. Just create a whole list of notes. And like I keep like a file in my computer called the idea page, and I'll just jot a whole bunch. Like I said, when you're brainstorming like that, so I just record everything, and I look at what I can use and what I can't use. Now, one thing I know. I imagine you probably got this feeling where you're like, I love all these ideas, but I can't use them. What do I do? Well, just kind of play a little psychological game with yourself. It's like, okay, well, for certain we can use these, but we'll just set these aside. Maybe we can make another story out of that later on, and that way your brain is more willing to let go because it'll just get used for another story. And actually, I have done that where I've taken ideas that I didn't use for one story and use it for another story. As I said, no, the brain gets real clean to its ideas and loves them all, and so that's one way you can work with your mental process. It's like, okay, well, we won't use it for this story, but maybe for the next story we'll use it.
It might depend on what stage you're at when you have all these ideas, but you got to become your own editor. I tend to be wordy. I tend to kind of throw a lot at it. And then I have to go back and kind of glean through that and sift through that and kind of trim it down. And maybe you'd save time if you do that in your head ahead of time. Generally, that's not my working process. But don't be afraid to cut things. It's sometimes hard,
your
but
beauties.
yeah,
Kill your
don't be afraid, because it'll come out sometimes better than you realize, and maybe some idea that you were kind of really attached to really didn't really belong there or flow. You know, sometimes it's about the flow of it more. So it might depend on where you are. If you're talking about big ideas, maybe two ideas can't fit in the same story, and you're going to have to cut that before you start. But if it's like in terms of like say scenes or just dialogue or that kind of thing, maybe there's a way to trim that afterwards, because you're going to have to go through, well, you should at least, and do like, you know, your several drafts, run through and kind of trim that thing down and polish it.
Mm-hmm. And actually, to use an example, because I've got my co-panelist here with me, Danny DeManna of the Godzilla Novelization Project. But, we did a panel. We did a panel yesterday on Shinichi Sekizawa and Takeshi Kimura, and so I guess if I was to offer a little bit of were you at the panel? Because I've been meeting people. Well, not the guy asked the question. But one of the things that Shinichi Sekizawa was known for was the simplicity of his stories. And there's one very famous one that Dan and I talked about yesterday, where when he wrote the script for Mothra, he was actually adapting a short story, and there was a lot of complicated mythology around Mothra and Infant Island and the fairies and things like that. And he cut all of it to streamline the story so he could stay focused on what was going on. So that might be something that, you know, to consider. You know, take a little lesson from Sekizawa and decide, you know, is this important, or is it slowing down what the story is really about?
And save your cut scenes. Because as I said, it's easier to let go if you still have them. Just tell yourself, okay, you know, if I really want to go, if I really want, I can always go back and get it. It's over here in a separate file. And as you progress with your story, you find that the stuff you discarded, you start losing your attachment to it, and it gets easier to let go as you go along.
Thank you.
So, I guess.
How about this guy?
Sure.
Well, wasn't someone else asking? Didn't someone else?
Go ahead, bud.
Oh, okay. Okay, so sometimes I would write a short story on like little docs or a piece of paper or a couple pieces of paper, something like that. In terms of like dialogue and like characters figuring out what's going on and all that, I'm good. I'm okay, but I've always struggled with writing like adequate action sequences, because I don't mean like an entire like fight. Like, you know, there's the monsters fighting, and then there's humans running away trying to save innocent like people caught in the battle. I'm fine with the latter part, but for the former, like if there's a big action part of a action sequence, I've always struggled with making it feel adequate enough. Like sometimes when I write them and I look back, I feel like if someone was reading this, that they would be thinking, like, what happened? Why is this action sequence so short? Why is it so, like...
So what you're asking is, do you have any tips for how to write an effective action sequence?
I think I know kind of what you're asking, and you know, this is a kaiju writing panel, and it's kind of interesting. We've talked about this in past years. You know, and this can go for anything. While you're talking, I was actually thinking of how Ian Fleming wrote James Bond, because, you know, there's action scenes in that, and they're very compelling. But when you're writing kaiju, it's a very visual genre. And action scenes, generally, especially in our culture, we've all seen a billion movies, very visual. And I think there's like a mistake that can be made where you're getting maybe too mechanical with it, and trying to say, okay, this is actually happening and that's actually happening. I tried, if it was my advice to you, if you've got a character point there or a plot point there or something like that, rather than trying to stage some kind of elaborate action sequence, focus on the character, maybe what they're feeling. Maybe like every single little thing that happens in this action sequence isn't necessarily clear and chronicled, but you get a general idea. It would also probably depend on if you're writing first person point of view or third person point of view, that kind of thing. But like when like I said, you were asking this question, Ian Fleming came to mind, and a lot of times when you'd read those books, it would be about what Bond was feeling and how like bad it was on him. It almost felt to me, the old Ian Fleming novels, like a Die Hard movie more than a Bond film would. because it was like that. You were really getting into what the character felt in this action sequence. But with giant monsters, I found that a challenge. If you read my fan fiction with giant monsters, I do a lot of literary tricks around that, actually. And I kind of make it more about the story that surrounds the monster battle rather than saying, okay, well, this technical thing's happening here and that kind of thing. So it depends on what your goal is, too.
And I would, to build off of that a little bit, I would recommend paying attention to 3 things when you're doing it. 1 is your choreography, and making sure that's compelling.
Right.
2 would be how much detail you want to put into it, because you could get so deep into what's going on at a particular moment that it ends up slowing the story down. Or if you give too little, just like that, like you were describing, and it'll just be over with, and it's not very exciting. And in terms of the actual writing of it, I recommend putting in as many verbs as you can, particularly action verbs, because it will create a sensation. It's a weird thing, because language can communicate things, a lot of things implicitly, and depending on the kinds of words that you use and the verbs in particular that you use, it can create this illusion of momentum as you're working on it. So those would be the 3 things I would recommend you look into.
I was just going to say that's one of my biggest writing advice, just in general, not even action sequences. Unless you're trying to make a stylistic choice to do something different, always use strong verbs. I mean, you can use
nouns
adjectives.
and verbs.
Yeah, you can use nouns and adjectives and everything else, great, but those verbs do so much for it. If instead of just saying was or is or did or liked, if you get more descriptive with the verbs, it's a good economy of language, for one. Because a lot of times you may look at a sentence and you've used an adjective or maybe an adverb or something like that, and it's like, wait, I could turn this into a verb and kind of make, a sentence that is kind of more powerful and compelling as you read it. But also check the authors you like to read. If you know somebody like, oh, this action, like I just mentioned Ian Fleming, if I was going to write an action sequence, maybe I'd go back and read one of his to see what he did that I liked, if I didn't instinctively already know it. And maybe you know it in your head and maybe you need to read it again. But find that inspiration. Not that you're copying them exactly, but you'll be inspired.
Do you think it's wrong to, basically sometimes when I write an action sequence, I kind of get this visual vision, basically sometimes when I write an action sequence, in my head I'm imagining it as a fight scene with a movie. I think, is that wrong?
No,
not at all.
I'll dovetail what these guys are saying. Since you already are thinking that's how your brain processes works, that's my experience to do monster scenes. And what I do is, if you go look at how they made movies, they did storyboards. They did little pictures of all the big, the big action moments. And I've done that with my own stories. Although it's more like a note than an actual picture, but you can do something like that. And what Skip said, though, I think is probably the first thing you want to do before you even start your action scene is really have a good understanding of your characters. What does your hero feel about his opponent, and vice versa? Do they fear each other? Do they hate each other? And that'll be your first guide of how to actually choreograph your action scene. And then one thing, if you want to watch out for the momentum once you got an elaborate action scene going, is try to avoid using adverbs and adjectives as much as possible, and prepositional phrases, because that will really slow down your story. Well, I've seen this a lot of time when I proofread other people's work, or even just actual professional work that I've read. The best verb is always couched inside a prepositional phrase. And so the sentence is overlong, and then the actual verb is was doing or was were, one of the passive voice verbs. And the best verb is hidden away in the prepositional phrase. You just kind of wasted a good verb by throwing into a preposition, because a preposition is just kind of an extended adjective or adverb. It's modifying something else. Harlan Ellison is a really, besides me and Fleming, Harlan Ellison is a good author to read, because he all his he's the verb guy. I mean, his stories are propelled by verbs, and I would read his stuff and then kind of go through his sentences and just look at what verbs they use. Just look at the verbs, and then that'll give you probably an idea how to write a good sequence. Hopefully, we haven't given you too much to work with here.
What's the author's name?
Harlan Ellison.
Yeah, who just died unfortunately last year.
Yeah.
Can I ask a quick follow-on? Just
Sure.
While on this topic, obviously you guys, have great-looking covers, and that sells because you want to attract. But today, based on the action sequence, how important is it to have illustrations, or is it not important at all? Because especially
In
for
the
like
book, or-
in the book, right? To have it in there, or for something like Kaiju, you're taking away the imagination, and you're creating one perspective, and you want to leave it open for people's interpretation.
I did this, I have illustrations in this book. I did it solely as a style choice. Because part of this is I was adapting Dickens. And if you go back and read the original edition of Dickens, he had these John Leech illustrations. And the illustrations I had Julian Yates do for this very similarly match, at least in terms of story content, beats those. So that was a style choice, but normally I would probably avoid it for my own tastes unless you just want them in there. But then you have to go through the whole process of, do I illustrate this myself? Am I satisfied with my own talent?
Yeah, because there's a cost
Et cetera,
involved
et
once you
cetera.
get, illustrations involved. Like, if you don't mind, I'll go use your book here as kind of an example. Of course. So anyway, so here we go. Here's a professionally published from Separate Press Kaiju novel, and he didn't require any pictures whatsoever, and it got along just fine without them. His descriptions of the monsters carried the story that I didn't feel I really need illustrations. And in fact, I think his description of his monsters is better than what they had for the cover art. But
Lovecraft had no illustrator, and he was pretty compelling stuff. So
yeah. And then I was gonna say, then like for my own novel, it says I'm dealing with original monsters. I just felt better creating a little bestiary in the back where I actually drew pictures of my own of the creatures, so you can visualize what they look like. Because one thing I always felt about kaiju fiction is why I really dragged my feet in doing original kaiju fiction was like, this is a visual medium, so how's this going to work with text? Because it's okay to do like fan fiction because everyone knows what Godzilla looks like. When doing your own monster, is this going to attract anyone's attention? So that's why I decided, just for my own satisfaction, I figured this will enhance the reader's imagination if I drew out my own creature and just stick it in the back of the book, and they can read through it and look at the pictures and say, oh, okay, now I know what they look like. Just in case you get like these readers who are maybe very, very, very new. Like one of my first people who bought my book was one of my coworkers, and she doesn't read this genre at all. And I was kind of thinking of that reader who doesn't even read monster stories, and that might make it easier for them. But I said that's purely an option. You can get by without illustrations.
Thank you.
And I said, especially if you could draw it now, if you can draw it on your own, go ahead and do it. But if you have to hire someone, then you want to consider not doing it. Don't feel bad not doing it in that case, because a lot of people don't do it.
Can I say something on that one?
Sure.
You do have someone you know who can probably do the work for you. Go to them. Could be your family who's an artist, or friends who's an artist. Yeah, they're skilled. Yeah, just go right to them. So you don't have to go find and pay for a professional. Just sometimes it's best to go with the ones closest to you.
You've had your hand up for a while, I'm sorry.
It's alright. I was going to ask about your characterization. Like, how much do the characters influence the plot? Is it character-driven or is it plot-driven for the stories, in a sense?
Depends on what kind of a story you're telling. My stories tend to be character-driven, but I've also found that I think with short fiction, I think plot-driven usually works a little bit better because you usually need a little bit more breathing room to get a good character-driven story. I'm not saying it can't happen, I'm just saying it's easier with a longer piece. But that isn't necessarily to say that one is better than the other. I mean, Raiders of the Lost Ark is a very plot-driven story, and it's wonderful. Great characters. Always make sure you have good characters, even if you have a plot-driven story, obviously. But yeah, it can work.
I think the thing is, you should first find your own voice, and then you'll figure out what's going to work for you best, what's going to work for your story best. Just keep practicing. I think that once you develop your own voice, well, then you're going to know, well, am I a plot-driven author or am I a character-driven author? Or you might get to the point where I feel, okay, this story definitely needs to be character-driven. You'll be able, as I said, once you get that practice and develop your own voice, you'll be able to answer that question on your own.
I get the vibe from your question that you might be plot-driven. Is that right, or are you more character-driven? Which do you think you are?
I absolutely love my characters.
So you're character-driven. Okay.
Everything.
Okay. I'm probably more character-driven as well, but when I write, I've always got theme and tone going on in my mind. I've written a lot of things that I think are even more than plot or character theme-driven, and I would see character as coming out of theme, and character can come out of plot as well. I mean, for Raiders of the Lost Ark, you basically had to create Indiana Jones to do that, So I would say don't be afraid to let it be character driven then if that's your case. The characters will write your plot. Like I said, for me a lot of times, so many stories that I did, it's like some kind of thematic statement, or I mean a lot of the old Rex Summeralls, it would be a thematic joke. Like the whole short story would be like some kind of like joke. I did stories that were like, the whole point of the story was like a commentary on how there's like it's like behind the scenes fan bickering. Okay, so I did at least 2 stories that was kind of the background theme of what was going on. It wasn't explicit, it was implied, but of course the characters all came out of that. And then what they were doing were all like illustrating that theme, and I knew my characters, and then a plot came from that. So if you love your characters and you know them, I'd say go with your characters, see where the plot goes, you know, follow your plot to make sure it makes sense, you know, to somebody that's not you. But yeah, don't be afraid to let those characters shine.
Can I ask you a question now? Do you have, based on the reason why you asked your question, you ever like read reviews and feel pressured that you should write a certain way? Is that kind of why you were asking?
No, I just started trying to get into future like beta reading because I plan on self-publishing. I'm trying to find a way to get really good characterization, tell the stories through the character, like with the characters driving it a lot. But I'm trying to work on making compelling characters. One of the things I got feedback on was that somebody didn't like the secondary protagonist, but they were also at the very beginning of the story. So I'm trying to focus around like I don't even know where I'm going with a lot of this.
So did your reader actually finish your story?
Much later.
Did her opinion change?
Yes.
Okay. I was going to say, if you know that the character that she doesn't like changes by the end of the book, you don't necessarily take what she says as gospel. I mean, let's be honest. Luke Skywalker is a whiny farm boy at the beginning of Star Wars, and then by the end, not so much. So if we all just based our opinion of Luke Skywalker on the first 20 minutes, I don't think any of us would like him a whole lot.
A lot of my ideas come from character interactions.
Yeah, but I think the most important thing is to make sure you do have good characters. Very rarely can you have a good story that has a great plot but terrible characters.
Is it?
Thank you.
Who do you want to pick next?
Okay. We're down to like, what, 5 minutes, right?
About 5 or 7. Now, we are the last panel, but we don't want to go forever.
Okay, yeah.
There's nothing after us is what I'm saying, so we can go all the way to 5 if you want.
Yeah, okay. So we're down to 6 minutes, and I think, I think you gentlemen with the glass thing, you were the next one to have your hand up. So go ahead.
So like I have like an outline in my head of like a story, and so I have like a point A and a point B. So like a bunch of different characters are like all in groups at point A, and then they're all together at point B. What would be a good way to transition from those 2 points to make it seem natural?
So you had characters in point A, and you want to give them the point B, and you just want to try to transition.
Well, they're like all in different like groups, and then all form together. So I just want to know like a good natural way, or just in general, to get from like a point A to a point B. What's a good transition?
Well, I think we'd probably need to know more details.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about like location in the plot or like character development, there's all kinds of ways that I can interpret what you're asking. But I think it kind of goes back to what, at least I would say, what is each of those individual characters? Are you going to each show their journey to point B? Are they kind of, some of them pairing up and going to point B together, or are they going in groups of 3? Are they crisscrossing? Do you have parallel stories of these characters all happening at the same time? Do they all go in mass? I mean, I guess I would just say look at each individual character and say, okay, how does this one get to point B? Make a big chart and then figure it out. I don't know. Any other suggestions?
Well, the one thought that came to my mind is, do they all have a common goal? If it's you're trying to get them, like they're all off in different places, you need to get them to one location for plot reasons, whatever. If they all end up, if they have a common goal, then that could work as well. Take Infinity War, for example. You have all of these heroes scattered all over the place, and then they all end up by the end of the movie, most of them end up in the same location.
Well, one trick that Shinichi Sekizawa probably murders his name, but anyways, he wrote all the early Godzilla films in the Showa era.
Most of them.
Yeah, quite a few. Yeah, you're right. But anyway, point is that one thing he did was get everyone together, was have them all one way or another related to each other. Like in Ghidorah 3-headed monster, you had a police officer, you had a reporter, and then you had a scientist. And the way he got them together was the police officer and the reporter were brother and sister, so naturally they're going to come together. And then the sister had a somewhat romantic interest in the scientist, and so that was how you would pull them all together. And so that's one thing you could do is see, it's like give these guys a common goal or maybe a common background so they have a reason to come together. I don't know, does that help at all? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have time for one more? Yeah. Okay. I saw your hand, so we'll go with you then.
Oh, me?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Just checking, just real quick thoughts on collaborations, not at your level, but just people that are just starting out, trying to just collaborate with somebody. Here's some ideas. Here's what I'm thinking. What do you think about that? Just for this social media, or what are some platforms for beginner writers to, besides like fan fiction sites where it's completed, are there ways to collaborate with other people, shoot ideas past each other?
Well, I suppose if they're all friends with each other, they can always get together, either email, Facebook, or some of our social media.
Well, that's we're trying to make those connections.
Yeah.
There are writers groups on Facebook that you could potentially join if you wanted to. I'm in several myself. Just depends on what kind of affinity you're looking for.
So want to take Patrick's question before this? Yeah, we'll take Patrick's.
Yeah, I think we have time. We got 3 minutes.
Mine was just about the kaiju stories. Where do you guys get your inspiration for your individual kaiju when you're making them all?
For me, the two that I have on display here, they actually came from Godzilla films. One was Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. The first time I saw it, I was actually disappointed because I thought the idea of Kiryu having the biological brain in halfway through the movie, it goes berserk, but then they fix it in 5 minutes and it never happens again. I thought that was a wonderful idea with a lot of story potential that kind of got wasted in that movie. So that's what this book is about. And then for this one, it was Godzilla '84, but it was the imagery in it, with the imagery with the music was evoking these different ideas to me that it was kind of inspiring different kinds of ideas and feelings and stories that I wanted to explore.
Yeah, well, it depends now. Like for instance, like when I had to make a monster, and I had a story where I knew what the human hero had to do, but I needed a monster in there, so I kind of knew, okay, the hero has to go to this location to get this information, then he has to fly halfway around the world with it, and I wanted the monster to pursue him, so I was thinking, okay, well, if the monster's going to pursue him, he's going to have to know how to fly, but since he's an animal, then how he's going to track the human character? I thought, well, what if he's like, telepathic? In which case, that way you can follow by mental signature, and get him that way. Then that's how I generate my monsters. Like, what attributes does he need for the story? You can piece it together that way, or you can do things more thematically. Like, okay, what kind of story you want to tell? So like when I'm going back to the earlier story I did for Matt Denny, where the monster's being controlled by aliens, is kind of like the story of monsters from the perspective of the monster. I thought, okay, what kind of monster is this character's going to be? Why is he so easily controlled? And how does he get out of this situation? I thought, well, what if he's really simple-minded, therefore he's easy to control. But then on the other hand, to get him out of that situation, what if he's self-aware of his weaknesses and he knows he's not that bright? So eventually he figures out, oh, wait a minute, someone's pulling my chain here. And so that's one way you can do it, like based on plot need or on your themes, and like, okay, then what attributes does my character have to have? It's almost the same thing you do with the human characters. Like, what attributes does my human character have to accomplish his story?
Yeah, motivation is key to anything, whether it's a kaiju or a character. Because that'll be, as I remember, I was talking with an author one time, and he said he was having trouble. He was writing a science fiction story with aliens and things, and most of the people in the group who were not used to science fiction were confused by by the alien part of the story. And the first thing I just asked him was, what does this alien want? What is the motivation for this alien for doing what he's doing? And he stopped and he thought, was like, oh yeah, I hadn't figured that out.
See, one thing that's nice though, since you're working with text, you don't have to worry about the outward design as much until you get the intrigue, until you get the character's psychology pieced together. Because that's what readers are going to be, because when you read this kind of text, this type of entertainment, usually their motivations and what's going on in their heads is going to be more interesting to the reader than what it looks like, because you can only do so much with text. And so once you get the character pieced together, and then eventually as you write, your imagination will put in the details of what it looks like.
It helps to become a little bit of a 5-year-old again too.
Yes, that is true too.
So just let that creativity flow. If you're talking about monsters, I mean, it's some pretty wacky stuff that you can come up with. Do you want them more serious? Do you want them funnier? Do you want them bizarre? But then it comes out of character. What you want them for.
And then when you get down to like, okay, I really need to figure out what this thing looks like. Well, just sketch. Just do little doodles and figure. Well, I like what this looks like. I like what that looks like. So you become almost like a graphic designer in a way. Okay, well, we're at the 5 o'clock mark, so I want to leave all of you with one piece of advice that they go, look, trust me, this will answer everyone's questions, and that is practice, practice, practice. And once you've done practice, you'll develop your own voice, and believe me, you'll answer your own questions that you asked today, even including, well, how do I deal with, negative feedback? Once you develop your own voice, you know what you need to do, you know what you're doing is right.
As Finding Forrester said, writers write.
Yes. Okay, well, thanks for coming. Don't forget to buy this book.
Left out one thing.
What?
Don't forget to read a lot.
Yes, that's true.
That is
Nathan, is one named Brandon Hoffman?